Michael Grant boarded the red-eye flight from New York to London with the heavy, dragging steps of a man who hadn't slept in what felt like weeks. The terminal lights were dim and hazy, reflecting off the glossy floors as he moved through the crowd. Shoulder bags slung across his chest, eyes tired, posture slightly hunched. He wasn't traveling for pleasure or adventure. He was here because his job demanded it, and because being a single dad meant saying yes to every paycheck, no matter how exhausted he felt. The plane hummed softly as he stepped inside, greeted by the crisp, professional smile of the flight attendants. He managed a polite nod, but his mind stayed somewhere else. Back home in their small Portland apartment, where his 7-year-old daughter Lily was probably curled up with her stuffed bunny beneath her twinkle lights. The thought made his chest tighten in a quiet, tender way. Seat 14A, window seat, good. He slid into it, letting the cool plastic headrest support the weight of a long, weary week. The cabin around him glowed in the soft blue of nighttime lighting, calming, steady, familiar. A businessman settled beside him, already typing on his laptop with frantic, jittery energy. Michael looked away, craving silence. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, rereading the message Lily had left him. "Good night, Daddy. Come home soon. I miss you big." The spelling wasn't perfect, but the sentiment hit him with heartfelt force. Michael wasn't the kind of man who cried easily, but fatigue had a way of lowering walls. He blinked hard and turned the screen down. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, trying to let the drone of the engines wash over him. He needed sleep. Real sleep, the deep kind that resets the soul. Being a single father wasn't glamorous. It was raw, relentless, and beautiful in a quiet, grounding way. Every school lunch, every late-night fever, every grocery run, he carried it all, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Yet tonight, his body felt fragile, almost breakable, the kind of tired that sits in your bones. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Michael closed his eyes. The world outside blurred into streaks of orange and white. He whispered a soft promise to himself and to Lily. Just get through this trip, then go home. He didn't know the sky had other plans. He didn't know this flight would ask for the part of him he tried hardest to bury. Sleep took Michael faster than he expected. One moment he was staring at the faint blue glow of the cabin lights, and the next he was drifting into a place he hadn't visited in years. A place he'd worked hard to shut away. The cockpit, sharp, sterile, humming with electricity. He knew it instantly. The narrow space, the glowing instruments, the feel of the flight stick resting naturally in his hand. It was all painfully familiar. Outside the canopy, the sky was pitch black, stretching endlessly like a quiet, waiting ocean. The air felt tense, charged, the way it used to right before a mission went sideways. A voice crackled through his headset, steady at first, then fading into something softer, more fragile. "Daddy, are you coming home?" Lily's voice didn't belong here. It shouldn't have been echoing through military comms, but dreams didn't play by rules. Michael's breath caught, the once steady cockpit blurred, colors smearing like wet paint. The warning lights began to flash, their red glow reflecting off the glass and onto his trembling hands. Suddenly, he wasn't in the sky anymore. He was back in his living room in Portland, dim, quiet, wrapped in the warm, homely scent of laundry and lavender. Lily stood in the doorway in her unicorn pajamas, clutching her stuffed bunny. Her eyes were wide, earnest, too wise for her age. "Are you done flying, Daddy?" He remembered this night, the ache in his chest, the overwhelming relief of telling her yes, that he was finished with the dangerous life, that he was choosing her over the sky. "I promise," he said in the dream, just as he had years ago. "I'm not going anywhere." But just as he reached to pull her into his arms, the room dissolved. The floor vanished. The darkness of the sky returned, swallowing everything. The cockpit alarms shrieked. And then, Michael jerked awake, heart pounding, breath uneven. Something was wrong, and the plane around him was far too quiet. Michael blinked hard, trying to steady his breathing. The dream still clung to him, Lily's small voice echoing in the spaces between heartbeats. He rubbed his eyes, forcing himself back into reality. The cabin lights glowed a muted amber now, the kind airlines used to ease passengers into sleep. Most people were resting, headphones on, blankets pulled to their chins. Then the intercom clicked. The sound was sharp, unsettling, like a crack splintering through quiet. Michael sat up straighter. Captain Hayes's voice came through, but it wasn't the calm, practiced tone pilots use for turbulence or seatbelt reminders. This voice was tight, strained, laced with an urgency that made Michael's stomach drop. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is any military pilot on board, please notify a flight attendant immediately. This is not a drill. A ripple moved through the cabin. Heads lifted, blankets shifted. Whispers turned into anxious murmurs. The businessman beside Michael paused his laptop mid-keystroke, eyes wide. A woman across the aisle clutched her necklace. The air itself felt different, thinner, tense, almost electric. Michael's hands trembled lightly on his armrest. He had heard that tone before, not often and never on a commercial flight, but enough times during his service to recognize the weight behind it. Something was wrong, something big. Sarah Bennett, the lead flight attendant, walked briskly down the aisle, her professional smile replaced by a focused, controlled expression. She scanned each row, hope and fear flickering behind her steady demeanor. Michael's pulse thudded harder. He knew what was coming. He knew exactly what stepping forward would mean. It wasn't just about guiding a plane. It was about reopening a life he'd sealed shut, breaking a promise he had sworn to his daughter, one he had repeated so many nights when she was scared he wouldn't come home. But if he stayed silent, if he pretended he hadn't heard, his breath caught painfully in his throat. Because deep down, beneath the fatigue and fear, he already knew. If he didn't stand up, no one else would. Michael swallowed hard, feeling the familiar tightness settle into his chest. The captain's urgent announcement still echoed through the cabin, filling the space with a quiet, rising panic. People glanced around nervously, searching for someone, anyone, who might fit the description of a military pilot. No one moved. Sarah Bennett continued walking the aisle, her steps brisk but controlled, the kind of calm professionalism that came from years of late-night flights and unexpected chaos. But even she couldn't hide the flicker of worry in her eyes. Michael gripped the armrests, knuckles pale, his thoughts spiraling. He'd trained for emergencies, lived through situations far worse than turbulence and technical malfunctions. But that was another life, a life he had packed away the day he promised Lily he was done with danger. Done with the skies that had taken too many of his friends. Done with the part of himself that chased adrenaline more than stability. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady the trembling in his hands. He could almost hear Lily's laugh, small and bright, echoing in his memory. See her lying on the couch watching cartoons, waiting for him to come home. Feel her tiny arms wrapping around his neck. "Daddy, you'll always come back, right?" He'd said yes. He'd believed it. But the silence around him now, the frightened whispers, the tightening breath of an entire cabin, told him something else. If he didn't get up, there might not be a homecoming. For anyone. A man 2 rows back muttered anxiously, "Why isn't someone helping? Doesn't anyone know how to fly?" Michael closed his eyes for one fragile moment. He didn't want to be the answer. He didn't want to reopen the chapter of his life he'd tried so hard to bury. But he also knew, with a heavy, painful clarity, that doing nothing was a choice too. And it was the wrong one. He took a deep, steadying breath and prepared to stand. Michael pushed himself halfway out of his seat, heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in his ears. For a second he hesitated, one last fragile pause before crossing a line he could never uncross. Then he stepped into the aisle. Sarah Bennett noticed him immediately. Her expression shifted, hope flickered, tempered by caution. "Sir," she said quietly, "do you have flight experience?" Michael nodded, though his voice caught before he managed. "I flew years ago. Military." A few passengers turned, their fearful faces suddenly focused on him. Their hope felt heavy, almost crushing. Sarah's professional instinct kicked in. "Do you have identification? Anything that confirms your service?" Michael shook his head. "Not with me. I haven't carried my military ID in a long time." Saying it out loud made the truth sting. He really had tried to walk away from that life. For a moment, Sarah's expression tightened. She wasn't being rude, she was being responsible. Letting the wrong person into the cockpit could be catastrophic. Before she could respond, a deep, steady voice came from behind Michael. "Let me talk to him." A broad-shouldered man in his late 50s stood up. Frank Dawson. His posture carried the unmistakable discipline of someone who had worn a uniform for decades. Frank stepped closer, eyes narrowing with a sharp, evaluating focus. Which branch? Air Force, Michael answered. What airframe? F-16, Viper. Frank didn't smile. He didn't congratulate him. He only fired another question. Fast, precise, the way a soldier tests another. What are the first 3 steps in a hydraulic failure protocol? Michael's answer came smooth, instinctive. Old muscle memory resurfacing. Frank nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. He's legit, Frank said to Sarah. No one who hasn't lived it can answer like that. A subtle shift moved through the cabin, fear bending into fragile relief. Sarah exhaled, steadying herself. Then she met Michael's eyes with newfound trust. Come with me. Michael swallowed, feeling the full weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. He had just stepped back into the sky he'd sworn he left behind. Sarah moved quickly, guiding Michael toward the front of the plane. The cabin fell into a hush as they passed, fear and fragile hope hanging in the air like static. Michael felt every gaze on him, their silent prayers pressing against his shoulders. He tried to steady his breathing, but his pulse thudded with a mix of dread and clarity. When they reached the cockpit door, Sarah tapped twice, her voice low but urgent. It's Sarah. I'm bringing someone in. The lock clicked. Michael stepped inside and his chest tightened. The cockpit was dim, illuminated only by the glow of instruments and flashing warning lights. Captain Hayes slumped in his seat, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Dr. Laura Kim knelt beside him, her voice calm but strained as she checked his pulse. He's had a stroke, she said. He's stable for now, but he can't fly. Beside him, First Officer Tom Miller gripped the controls with shaky hands. Young, overwhelmed, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like someone trying to hold back a storm with bare hands. His eyes darted to Michael. They said you were military. Air Force, Michael answered, stepping closer. His voice felt steadier than his heart. Tom gestured helplessly at the panel. We lost part of the hydraulic system. Autopilot failed. I've never handled anything like this. Michael scanned the screens, the gauges, the trembling attitude indicator. Old instincts stirred, quiet, sharp, disciplined. The room seemed to narrow until only the controls and the crisis existed. You're in manual reversion, Michael said softly. The plane is fighting you. She'll feel heavy, slow, but not impossible. Tom's voice cracked. I don't know if I can land her. Michael's breath caught, not in fear but in recognition. He knew that look. He'd worn it once. Sarah hovered in the doorway, waiting for someone to claim the moment. Michael finally spoke, his voice calm, grounded, almost gentle. You're not doing this alone. Tom exhaled, relief mixing with fear. And just like that, Michael Grant, the man who had abandoned the sky, stepped back into the seat he thought he'd never fill again. Tom slid slightly out of the captain's seat, giving Michael room to stand behind him. The cockpit felt smaller now, tight, tense, humming with a quiet urgency that seeped into every breath. Warning lights blinked in angry red, casting uneasy shadows across the control panels. Michael steadied his voice. You're doing fine, Tom. You kept us in the air. That matters. Tom swallowed hard, gripping the yoke like it was slipping away from him. I've never flown without full hydraulics, not like this. I have, Michael said softly. The admission felt raw, exposing a part of himself he'd buried. And we're going to get through it. Sarah reappeared in the doorway. The passengers are restless. People are scared. Her voice wavered just enough to show she was human, not unshakable. Michael nodded. Tell them we're diverting. Tell them we're working the problem. He didn't promise safety, not yet. Americans value honesty, especially in crisis. False reassurance could shatter more than it helped. Sarah disappeared again, closing the door gently behind her. Tom's voice was a whisper. Do you want to take over? Michael felt the weight of that question. Heavy, dangerous, familiar. If he said yes, he'd be fully stepping back into a life he'd sworn off, the life he left for Lily. But when he looked at Tom, young, frightened, sweating through his uniform, something paternal and steady rose inside him. Not yet, Michael said. I need you with me. I'll guide. You fly, for now. Tom nodded, trying to breathe through the panic tightening his shoulders. Michael rested one hand on the back of Tom's chair, grounding him. Listen to me. Every input from now on has to be slow, deliberate, measured. Think fluid. Think gentle. This plane wants to fight you, but she'll listen if you don't force her. Tom inhaled shakily. Okay, got it. Outside, the Atlantic stretched into an endless, moonlit void. Inside, Michael Grant, the father who walked away from the sky, prepared to take it back, one breath at a time. The cockpit vibrated with a low, uneven rumble as the aircraft fought the thinning hydraulics. Tom tried to keep his movements controlled, but the yoke felt heavier with every passing minute, like the plane was slowly turning to stone beneath his hands. Sweat gathered at his temples. Michael leaned closer, scanning the gauges. The hydraulic pressure had dropped again. Too fast, too sharply. We can't make London, he said quietly. Tom glanced over, dread flickering in his eyes. How far can we go? Michael calculated instinctively. Distance, wind, altitude, fuel burn. Old habits, once dormant, woke with precision. Shannon, Ireland. It's our best shot. Tom nodded, but his voice cracked. If the hydraulics fail completely, they will. Michael let the truth land, steady but heavy. Americans value clarity, especially when life hangs by a thread. But we don't give up the plane. We fly her as far as she'll let us. Tom swallowed, his breathing shallow. Michael rested a grounding hand on his shoulder. Look at me. Tom did, eyes strained, vulnerable. You are not failing. You're making decisions with the information you have. That's what real pilots do. A tremor shook the fuselage, rattling loose items and sending a pulse of fear through both men. From the cabin came a muffled cry, then another. People could sense the shift, the way the plane moved with a fragile, uneven rhythm. Sarah cracked open the cockpit door. Her face was pale but composed. They want answers, she whispered. People are scared. Michael nodded. Tell them the truth. We're diverting. We're in control. And we're doing everything we can. Not a promise, a commitment. She closed the door again. Michael looked back at Tom. Start the turn. Slow, steady, no sudden movements. Tom's hands shook, but he obeyed. Michael took a breath. Deep, intentional, bracing. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the sky. He was answering it. As the plane began its slow, deliberate turn toward Ireland, the cabin felt the shift. What had been a smooth nighttime flight now carried a subtle, unsettling wobble. Just enough for passengers to sense something was wrong. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs into rising voices. A woman near row 12 clutched her husband's arm, her breath shaky. A father hugged his teenage daughter, murmuring reassurances he didn't fully believe. The businessman who'd sat next to Michael earlier was now pale, gripping the armrests like the plane might tilt out of the sky at any moment. Sarah moved through the aisle with calm determination, but fear clung to the air like static. She could feel it, raw, collective, contagious. At row 18, a man who had clearly been drinking stood unsteadily, his words slurred but loud enough to cut through the quiet chaos. What's going on? Why aren't we being told the truth? A few heads turned, anxiety rippled outward. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. Sir, please sit down. We're managing. Managing? He barked. The plane's shaking, and now some random guy is in the cockpit? His accusation hit the cabin like a spark. People glanced around, their fragile composure wavering. At the front of the plane, Frank Dawson rose to his feet, posture strong and unwavering. That random guy is a trained fighter pilot, he said firmly. He knows more about emergencies than any of us. The man scoffed. How do we know that? Frank's voice dropped into something heavy and authoritative. Because I served, and I know the look of someone who's done this before. Silence followed, tense, uncertain, but quieter. Sarah gave Frank a grateful nod before addressing the cabin, her voice grounded but compassionate. We're heading to the nearest airport. The crew is working the problem. We need everyone to stay calm and stay seated. Passengers nodded, some reluctantly, some gratefully, all of them clinging to any thread of reassurance. But even as order returned, the fear remained. Quiet, trembling, impossible to fully hide. Up front, behind the sealed cockpit door, Michael and Tom were fighting a different kind of turbulence, and every soul on board felt the weight of the approaching descent. Inside the cockpit, the quiet hum of instruments had turned into a steady chorus of warnings, soft at first, then sharper, more insistent. Tom's hands tightened on the yoke as another vibration rippled through the aircraft, a low, unsettling shudder that made the overhead panels tremble. Michael scanned the gauges again, jaw tightening. The numbers told a story he didn't want to read. Hydraulic pressure falling fast. "Tom," he said, keeping his voice steady. "How's the feel?" "Heavy," Tom whispered. "Like she's sinking. Like she doesn't want to climb back." "That's because she can't," Michael said gently. "We're losing authority on the control surfaces. You'll have to ride the descent instead of forcing it." Tom swallowed hard. His breathing was ragged, uneven, panic edging in. Michael leaned closer, grounding him with a firm, reassuring tone. "Look at me." Tom did. "This is just a different kind of flying. Not impossible. Not as long as we work together." A violent jolt suddenly shook the aircraft, throwing both men forward. Loose charts and pens clattered off consoles. A sharp alarm sounded, piercing and urgent. "Jesus," Tom gasped. "Was that turbulence?" "Partly." Michael's eyes stayed fixed on the gauges. "And partly because she's losing control authority. We're running out of time." From the cabin came a faint echo, voices rising, then dipping into frantic murmurs. People felt the change now. The trembling wasn't subtle anymore. Michael reached out and placed a steady hand over Tom's. "We're still flying her. She hasn't quit on us yet." Tom nodded, but his voice quivered. "What happens if the hydraulics hit zero?" Michael hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it real. "We switched to differential thrust," he finally said. "Engines only." Tom stared at him. That's something they never even taught in training." "That's because it's not supposed to work," Michael admitted, voice low. "But I've done it before." The plane shook again, harder this time. The sky outside was dark, endless, indifferent. Inside, Michael Grant braced himself for the kind of flying he swore he'd left behind. The coastline of Ireland appeared as a faint, jagged outline beneath the clouds, a thin promise of safety in a sky that felt increasingly hostile. The altimeter wound down faster than Tom wanted, and each drop sent a cold spike of fear through him. Michael leaned forward, eyes scanning every instrument with quiet, controlled urgency. The hydraulic gauge flickered at 2%. Barely anything left. "Okay, Tom," he said, voice calm despite the chaos. "Ease her down another degree. Gentle, like you're setting a glass on a counter." Tom's hands trembled as he adjusted the yoke. The plane answered sluggishly, fighting every command. Another shudder rocked the cabin, harder this time. From behind the cockpit door came screaming, then muffled prayers, then silence again. Tom's voice cracked. "I can't keep her stable." "Yes, you can," Michael said firmly. His tone sharpened, but not unkind. It was the voice of someone who had hauled planes out of worse situations. "You're not alone. Stay with me." A warning alarm blared, relentless, urgent. "Hydraulics 1%. Michael's stomach tightened. "All right, we're almost out. When it hits zero, I'll take over. You'll monitor instruments and call out deviations." Tom swallowed hard. "What if—" "No what ifs. We fly the plane we have." The runway lights of Shannon Airport suddenly cut through the darkness, glowing like a lifeline in the void. Closer. Still too far, but close enough to hope. Then it happened. The gauge hit 0% and flatlined. The yoke went slack in Tom's hands, dead weight. Tom froze. "Michael, I've got nothing." "I know," Michael whispered. He reached for the throttles with both hands. The plane dipped, nose drifting off center. Michael slammed one engine forward and pulled the other back, muscles straining. The aircraft lurched violently, jerking toward the runway. Tom braced himself, voice trembling. "You're really doing this with engines alone." Michael didn't look away from the windshield. "We don't quit when people are counting on us." The ground rushed upward, lights blurred, metal groaned. The cockpit shook like it was coming apart. Michael held the throttle steady, jaw locked, heart steady, every instinct alive. This was the moment everything came down to. And he wasn't letting go. The impact hit like a freight train. The aircraft slammed onto the runway with a bone-rattling thud, bouncing once, hard, before crashing down again. Loose panels shook. Overhead bins popped open. Passengers cried out in terror as the plane skidded violently, sparks spraying from beneath the fuselage. Michael fought the throttles with everything he had left. The runway lights streaked past in frantic blurs. The plane wasn't slowing fast enough. Come on," he whispered, his voice raw, strained, almost prayerful. Tom shouted, "We're not going to stop in time." But Michael saw it. A faint row of red beacons to the right. The engineered materials arresting system. The sandbed designed to save the unlucky few who ran out of runway. He shoved one engine forward, cut the other completely. The plane groaned, twisting under the asymmetrical thrust before finally veering toward the sand. And then, impact. The sand roared beneath them, dragging the aircraft to a violent, grinding halt. Everyone lurched forward, held only by their seatbelts. A final jolt rattled the cockpit, then everything went still. Quiet, stunned, breathless, trembling quiet. Tom let out a shaking exhale. We, we made it. Michael didn't speak. His eyes stung with the weight of everything. Fear, relief, exhaustion, gratitude. He released the throttle slowly, feeling his hands finally begin to shake. Behind them, the cabin erupted into sobs, prayers, laughter, raw, emotional, overwhelming. Sarah opened the cockpit door, tears streaking her face. "You saved them," she whispered. Michael stepped into the aisle. People reached for him, touching his arm, thanking him, holding his hand. A mother hugged him and said her kids would see their dad again because of him. An elderly man pressed his forehead against Michael's shoulder in gratitude. But Michael's mind was already somewhere else. Home, with Lily. Hours later, after interviews, paramedics, and endless questions, Michael finally found a moment outside on the cold Irish tarmac. Emergency lights flashed across the sand-coated plain behind him. The night felt quiet now, peaceful in a way only survivors understand. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with missed calls from Mrs. Kowalski, the neighbor, in a simple text. "Lily's asleep. She asked if you'd be home tomorrow." Michael closed his eyes as a warm, aching wave washed over him. He hadn't broken his promise. He had kept it. He was coming home, and he'd ensured 189 others would too. He dialed back, his voice hoarse but steady when Mrs. Kowalski answered. Tell her Daddy's on his way." He looked up at the sky, vast, dark, no longer something to fear. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't in the air, but inside ourselves. A question for you, the viewer. If you were in Michael's shoes, exhausted, afraid of breaking a promise to the person you love most, would you have stood up? Would you have risked everything for people you'd never met? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone. If this story moved you, please like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional, powerful stories like this one. Your support helps keep these stories alive.